Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So yeah, this might be this might be short.
This might be the crew today, but I guess let's wait a few more minutes and see if anyone else shows up.
Sure.
All right, I guess we can start. I don't think there's
Yeah,
anyone.
probably safe.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I guess we can go through the agenda. So first off, open PRs. We got two. First one is a debug guide that Susan had added. Basically just walk someone through who wants to get started on how they can run the CLI locally when developing, and then also the server. Yeah, pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I was gonna say I looked at this and I didn't try it because I don't use VS Code, but it looked reasonable as far as what I know about launch profiles for VS Code.
Yeah, same. I actually used one. I used the CLI one that Susan had added, so I think that one's good to go. I'm sure the other one works too. I guess one thing is maybe we want to add like the Kubernetes guide too, like how to like build and deploy and test that in your own cluster, like building with the Docker file and then updating the YAML file to pull the right image that you've created and all of that. So
yeah, there's a couple ways that you can do it. Like if you are running against an AKS or like a cloud-based cluster, you can there's services and tools you can use to get the traffic to proxy to like your local host.
Yep.
So you can run it that way. I usually, when I'm running my local Docker cluster, I just tell Gatekeeper that the URL for the service is localhost, and then I run it locally and debug. And that's a nice way to be able to step through it when the request comes from Gatekeeper. However, if you do put breakpoints, obviously you'll hit the timeout. so it'll fail anyways, but you can at least see what like it would have looked like, which is nice. So, but yeah, that could be a good future add.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think all of us have our own way of debugging for Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Does, and I do it a little bit differently. I think I do it the hard way. I just rebuild a Docker file, push it to registry, and then pull it from my cluster and restart.
That's the scorched earth approach, just blow the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah, just nuke the whole thing. So okay, cool. So I just added a comment, and then I guess if Susan wants to add it, we can add it. Otherwise, no harm.
Sure.
Cool. The second one is the bug fix for the default config path issue. I think Susan briefly walked me through it, but basically when she had added the config manager, which was used in the dynamic configuration file watcher implementation, there were some changes that were made to the config.load method, which didn't handle like if an empty file path was passed in, which is why there were issues. So to get around that, I think she just made a small change to update to use this other helper method, which handles the empty string scenario too. So
I see. Gotcha. And then config.load passes empty string. I see. So it's just a wrapper. Okay.
Yep. So yeah, I think that one looks good to me too. I left a small comment here. I think there's a little bit of redundant code in the config manager now. It doesn't actually need to call this because load does now too. But yeah, that's if she wants to remove it, she can. So
gotcha.
Yeah. Cool. So we'll wait, I guess, till next week until she comes back and responds, and then we can merge those in.
Yep. And then let me see. Yeah, so I was just looking at the actual issue. It's 274.
Okay, let me bring it up. Oh, 274. Okay.
Yeah. So this is the one that, so based on our prioritization, if I look at that like project board, this is actually below a number of ones, but I had talked to David about this one specifically, like working on this one. So I guess I'll have to ask if this should be, because I think Susan was doing design things for CRD, which is like 3 of those next issues. And then the next thing we have is multiple certificates, which is like sort of related to the Alpha 3 support if you consider the trust store. So yeah,
actually,
I've just been
no, I'm actually not really too familiar with this whole trust store concept. Have they released Alpha 3 or?
I believe so. the idea of trust store is just that like you could have directory, like you use rather than putting all of your PEMs in a bundle, you would put them in a directory structure, and the naming convention dictates when certain certificates actually get used as part of the validation.
Okay.
So that's there's more in it. There's like a big old document about how it works. But that's the TLDR. So
Okay.
for us, it, and I believe there's also like a config markup that you provide to notation. So that's why I
Okay.
was like, this is gonna be weird because now we are adding yet another layer of like places where you could decide to apply configuration. So yeah, it's something. It's like because we have all these things that we're sort of gluing together that all have their own amount of features that support the use of that tool standalone. Like this would be nice if you were using notation by itself.
Yep.
But if you're using notation in the context of Ratify and an admission controller, then there's a lot of overlap between like what you get out of some of the features that notation provides and what you get out of the admission controllers configuration and constraint definition. So that's where the issue that we have specifically around adding alpha 3 support is like says that we'd update this issue with more details later. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so that was like I can just go add, like I can just update our dependencies so that we use notation go alpha 3, and then just make the implement, like if there's breaking changes, just make the implementation do what it does right now as best as possible. And we like essentially from a trust store perspective, we could sort of ignore the fact that that exists by putting all of the PEMs in one place
Mhm.
and select star from. So it would make it, we'd be ready to do more fancy things with that, but we wouldn't be doing more fancy things with that. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the whole purpose switching to this is that we use the trust store. So
yeah, it just gets we like this will require a larger discussion about how we so Ratify has its own configuration language, and we're essentially going to be taking Ratify configuration language and deciding how to change that into notation configuration language.
yep.
And whether or not we want to just directly support notation configuration language, letting people append that in the Ratify configuration.
Mhm.
um I have some opinions on it, but yeah, so there's a little bit. And then from a Kubernetes perspective, like we'll essentially have to figure out how we want to go about building, like cobbling together the trust store. Because on a host, you might build it once and then it's just there. But in the container, if you're mounting certs from all over the place, then it
Yep.
gets more complicated. So
Okay. Um, yeah, I think we gotta maybe the first step for this is that we break it down into like a design item, kind of how we did with the CRD. Because yeah, it's just not like a one-shot feature update. So
yeah, like we can, if the like the easiest first thing to do would just be to intro like add it as a dependency so that it's
mhm.
there. And then if I'll have to see, if I haven't checked if that is going to create a bunch of rework. Like that could be a good starting point if there's going to be a lot of shuffling that we have to do to introduce alpha 3 anyways,
Yep.
because then we could undertake that while we sort of wait to decide how we're gonna go about trust store.
Okay. I think that makes sense. So did you want to like just try like updating the Go mod, and then let's just see how bad
Yeah,
it is.
yeah. I'm just gonna let it rip and see what happens, and
Yeah.
if things explode, then we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. Let's see. Anything else? Like,
I think, I mean, as far as what we're PRs and what we're doing right now, I think that's about. Are you doing that 138, the fail no signature?
yeah, so that actually that works. So let me open it.
And does that fail from a verifier perspective, or does that fail from like an executor perspective?
It fails from an executor perspective.
But it fails today because there's no verifiers, right? Or there's no artifacts.
Yes, because there's no artifacts, and the policy is configured. You set this basically to any, which means that it's looking for at least one. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So if we do have like another, so when you ran through that scenario where you had like another artifact, it still doesn't. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess if this is, if based on our policy that we have with any, if this works now, then we can probably close this, since that's what this specifically was.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to close it. I wanted to let this sit, but I think this is, yeah, this is fine.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like, yeah, in pass-through mode, it's called pass-through mode because the idea is the admission controller will, or whatever framework you're using for that, will decide, which makes sense. And so in the normal or the default mode, whatever we call that, if the policy stuff is working correctly, then I at least as far as I'm concerned, that's reasonable to close this, since that was explicitly what this was for.
Okay.
Unless you had, did you have other concerns about this?
No, I mean, it works. It's just, I guess I was trying to test this out, and I was trying to basically attach like an SBOM to it instead. So the SBOM verifier was there, but then provide the policy as this. And in that case, like, it should fail because you're not going to have a matching artifact type. And so that worked.
Right.
So I'm going to assume I think that's what the scenario that we're talking about here. So
yeah, the scenario that, yeah, this was explicitly calling out, if you have a verifier enabled and you expect it to validate something and there's nothing for it to validate, then should it pass? And I guess that was a broader discussion, because I don't know, if just because you have a verifier, like if we enabled 100 verifiers, but your policy, you just so they were there, but you only cared about 3, for different scenarios, like, I could, yeah. So, but yeah, at least for this, I think this is reasonable. We can close this one, at least in my opinion.
Okay, I'm gonna actually just go ahead and do it right now then. It's been sitting for like 20 days, so
yeah.
yeah. Cool. All right. Okay. So Yeah, this one is interesting.
And what
Yeah, the manifest index thing. So typically the index is going to be used usually for like the different architectures, right? Like that's the most like the OCI index is typically used for that. So if we have like a tag to digest mutation set up, then we won't really have this issue. But if we do encounter, for whatever reason, the manifest that's pointing to is an index, then is it really Ratify's job to like handle it separately? Like you can call the refers on the index manifest itself and find artifacts attached at the index level and then verify there. But
I mean, I'm less familiar with this area, like, but I would say, like, there's only at the level, at the Ratify level, there's only so much we could do.
yeah,
like with what we are provided by the caller.
mm-hmm.
So, and I think Rita also called out that we like this is a generic problem. Like this is not a Ratify problem.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly, I think we were talking about something like this when we were talking about specifically tag to digest with respect to multi-arc images.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying, yeah, this is like not just like everybody has that same problem that's hard to figure out. So
yeah,
yeah, I guess the short answer is I'd have to do some more homework to have a stronger opinion about this, but like based on my current knowledge, like if we assume that the upstream is like if there's a mutator that's doing tag to digest at the admission controller level and then providing us just the digest, like I think we just validate that. Like we can't, should Ratify be responsible for all this indirection? Probably not. Like it's just meant to validate what it's given. So whether or not what it's given is what it should have been given is more of like a user thing.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially like in a Kubernetes scenario, that's definitely true. How about like in the CLI scenario, right? Like then you can actually assume maybe the host that it's running on, you can extract the host information and choose the architecture accordingly, right?
Yeah, you could. I mean, also, could you have multi-arc clusters though? Like, I guess the same, like in Kubernetes, if you had agent pools that were different. I don't know if that's supported, but like theoretically, if you had agent pools of different architectures, you'd have to do the same thing. Like, so I guess short TLDR is I don't know.
Okay.
My inclination is to just rely on whatever we get from the user or the admission controller though.
Yeah, I think that's like that would be the easiest scenario. I'm just gonna quickly note those down. So
So what Steve here is saying that if an index is signed, it's not a validation of the content, the referenced content. So I guess Steve's opinion is we should follow until like we should go until we hit an image manifest. Manifest of the image that would actually get pulled. If the index and platforms are signed, great. If the index isn't signed, but the platform manifest is signed. Should it fail as the index wasn't signed with the okay. All right. Suggest we ignore signatures against the index. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, based off of how, like, if we treat Ratify as being like at the same level as notation, and if notation CLI is actually like unpacking it and grabbing the host specific architecture manifest, I mean, then for the Ratify CLI, yeah, then it would make sense. But I don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to look at notations because since we're just using notation Go, like when we're just using the verify from that, like we're subverting whatever logic notation has that does this. So I guess it'd be worthwhile to go look at what they decided to do, which it seems like Steve is saying is to ignore manifest signatures or ignore index, like don't care about index.
Yep. Okay. Never mind then.
So, all right. So I guess
question mark. Okay.
Yeah, step one would be maybe go look at how notation is handling this and see whether or not this would be a non-trivial change.
I'll put this in the notes actually. Yeah, I think that's the first step. See how they handle it, and I have a feeling they don't as of now.
they'll just look at the index and be like super
and sign the index. But I don't know. Don't quote me on that. Maybe they are smarter. So
yeah, I'd have to look as well.
Yeah, I can check that out. I'll take that. I'll see what they're doing.
Okay.
Let's see. Anything else? So this is like, okay, this is like what we sent back, like the payload we sent back. So just add like a version to that. I'm assuming that's what.
Yeah. So where this came out of pass through mode. So when we did pass through mode, we a little bit opened Pandora's box because by doing that, we exposed the internal representation of results to callers. So if we decided to change the internal representation of like a verifier result, for example, we could potentially break customers who wrote Rego against that format. So yeah, that's where this came from. So I do think it's reasonable to add this. Potentially we could also introduce like a DTO layer to like separate the like what's provided to a call back to the caller from our internal like representation of results. At least today they would look the same, but that would allow us the flexibility to make changes to that if we needed to without breaking people until we decided to break them. So, but yeah, I mean, at least for now, like if we just wanted to do this today with minimal change, we could. We would just add a field to the response object with a version.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. I guess that would tell people what they're working with, but I could see it getting very complicated in Rego to try to handle multiple versions of the response.
That was my next question. That means the clients, when they're creating the Rego, have to account for it. So
yeah. So that's why I was like, it would be useful because then it'd be very obvious when this changed out from under you because you could look at it. But how would you deal with it? I don't think it's like if you look at the Rego, like the boilerplate Rego that I added for pass-through mode is already like, starting to get a
Mhm.
little more complicated. So yeah, having somebody like essentially start programming in Rego, like, oh yeah, if you're version 1, do all of these. If you're version 2, do all of these. I mean, yeah, I guess it's like somebody could do that, but I think it'd probably be more likely that somebody would just change their syntax to version 2, and
Yeah. Yep.
so,
Yeah.
so at any rate, yeah, with this would be a short ad at least today. But if we wanted to future proof, then yeah, we'd have to go through and add DTOs to, and then transformers to take our internal struct representations and transmute them into the DTO and then return.
Yeah. Makes sense. I personally think that, like, because we are at this stage, early stage, it's probably enough to just put the version property and then revisit this.
Yeah, yeah. Like, and our the other thing that this gets a little complicated is we our the way that we represent data is like an empty interface for some of these verifier results, and so it's dictated by the verify, like every individual thing dictates its own way of storing
Yeah.
this information. So like, let's say somebody came along and wrote some plugin and they changed the way that their plugin returns data. Well, they've just broken this contract. And so we'd have to be more strict about the way that like we consume verifier data, and we'd essentially have to impose like we'd have to come up with that DTO to provide stronger guarantees about the contents of the return value. And then we would have to require that every plugin implement that, so that, the same guarantee is there, that they could change to their heart's delight, but they are still required to, fit in this box. So yeah, it's a little complicated because it is very fluid. Like everything, a lot of empty interfaces and a lot of things get to decide what stuff looks like. So yeah, I'm inclined to slap a version number in there and and wait. Especially like if we went 1.0 with Ratify, then yeah, I'd buy like wanting this to be
Mm-hmm.
a little more strict. But like, if this is still likely to change over the course of reaching like maturity, then yeah, I don't think there's any like formal definition of that response. There's examples. I think in the document I wrote on how to like use the pass-through response, there's an example of what it could look like, but that's about as much detail as you'll get on what that looks like from documentation right now.
Okay. All right. I know, like, this got deprioritized a little bit, but in my opinion, the whole like supporting Go routines and things like that are going to be pretty important to do anything apart from the base scenario, because we literally have zero parallelization among the
Yeah,
verifiers, among the artifacts, among the refer stores. Yeah, we only have one, but more important, at the artifact level. And so
yeah. I
it's
think and I think that this could be like on the easier side of
mhm,
making parallel, because all of the there's not a bunch of like shared resources that require writes. Like the shared resources are the verifiers, and the verifiers all have static configurations that aren't changed by any execution. So
Yeah.
I think I think we could probably get some wins there. The only thing that would be outstanding is what happens when we sub-process 6 verifiers at the same time, so none of them run in process. Or no, they run. Do they? No, I don't think they run in process. I don't know, but yeah, we'd have to see what happens if there's any hiccups with that. But like, I want to say that this could be easy to do some of, at least. Like so there's 2 levels, right? There's like if we have multiple images and if we have multiple artifacts, I think.
Yeah, actually there's like multiple levels. There's like at the highest level, multiple images, then it's at if you have multiple refer stores, and then for each refer store, you would have multiple artifacts, right? Doing those in parallel processing. And then at the artifact level, you have multiple verifiers in parallel. So technically you will have like 5 levels of nested parallelization if you wanted to fully like extract as much. But
and the only real blockers, like synchronous blockers, would be requests to the registry, right? So like we have to before we can parallelize processing of artifacts, we have to get them all back. So, and then if they're nested, you'd have to wait until you get all those back. But I'm trying to think, like, probably the biggest wins would be multi artifact, like parallelizing processing the artifacts, since at least initially we're likely to have few verifiers and we're likely to have a number of artifacts and then multiple images, since init containers for a decent number of things and multiple containers in same pods is probably going to be the most relevant scenario.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess the only write operation that might require locking is our local Aura store cache that we use to store like the artifact manifest descriptors. And if you have multiple in parallel fetching of the artifact manifest, then in each one trying to write to the store, might have issues. So
yeah, in theory you wouldn't.
Yeah, in
ideally, because they're gonna write. I mean, maybe you'd still get locking potentially, but you'd like, in theory, all of them are requesting separate artifacts. So
yeah, but there are risks of like shared blobs. I don't know if that's even a scenario to consider, but
yeah, I think we're pushing the bounds of what the local cache was meant to be. So this is Aura's local cache. Yeah, I mean, I think the only way that it was done that way in general was because that was the only store that I could get to work correctly when I was doing the Aura stuff originally. So we could potentially dust off moving to in-memory. And you could have one in-memory per artifact or per like validation. Then you wouldn't have any locking. Although it would you would lose all the caching benefit. Like if you were reissuing the same request, then you wouldn't have those artifacts cached locally. But
Yeah.
maybe that's okay. Maybe if instead of caching artifacts, we cached results, then
Ooh, that gets tricky, right? Unless you do it at the, you could do it, actually that would work if, because the digest is dependent on the
yeah,
content, so you don't have to worry about something changing. Okay.
yeah. So you could cache, yeah, because like if you cache the result of the overall request and then a new request came in, but there were different sets of artifacts, then it
Yeah.
wouldn't work. But
Yeah.
if at a per artifact level, if you cached the result, then technically you wouldn't have to re-request it. So that's one way, and that'd be cheaper than the artifact cache, because this would just be like a very small key and a boolean. Maybe this could be a for later thing, but yeah, agreed that we should parallelize and see what happens, at least, because I
Yeah.
think that's like more so than, at least in our case, like the verifiers are definitely a nice to have, and I think they're important for like Kate's native experience, but also not timing out on every request is also a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, if we're timing out, it doesn't matter what we have functionality wise, it's useless. So that's why I personally think it's kind of a bigger priority. But
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it'd be, what else do we have that's like technically before this? Mutual TLS. It's a fun one. That was the latest gatekeeper ad, right?
Mhm.
Their latest thing is this required or is this optional? And we're just saying we should do this.
I think we have by default it's enabled. Yeah, it's enabled by default, but then we have to like add a flag to disable it.
I see.
And that's why that's what the issue is, so that we can support it and then we don't have to have the user set up gatekeeper to disable it. So
my understanding is it's non-trivial adding this.
Yeah, I don't have experience with this, but I do know someone who has experience with enabling MTLS on other services, and it's not trivial. So
especially because like in clusters, so you have to set up like CAs for gatekeeper, and then you have to get like CSRs for your like you got to get your cert from that CA for our service, and then we have to put that in cluster. Yeah, so this definitely complicates things. I guess this is another non-starter if we're going to ship like if the default gatekeeper that's shipped by cloud providers is going to just use the defaults, which is MTLS required, then yeah. I guess probably why this is higher is because even if we don't parallelize, if we start with a case where something has 3 artifacts, then it can go slow. But if you don't have mutual TLS, then it won't work in the default deployment.
yeah,
okay.
True, but
okay. So if you want to look, do you want to, or we already said there was one that was good to pick up?
So I think for me, what I'm going to look into, I'm going to first look into the how notation and handles the.
Oh yeah, the manifest index. Yeah. 101. If you want to assign that, did you assign that one or self-assign that, or did it already just not update this table?
No, I haven't. Let me self-assign that. Where did it go?
It's 101. It's line 14.
Oh yeah, here we go. Okay. I guess I can't. I think David is the only one who has.
On the right there, the little assign, it doesn't let you just mess with that. It's kind of lame.
Yeah, I don't know. can't.
All right. I just think if you find it in the,
Yeah, I'll find the issue, and then it's 101.
that's probably enough stuff to make it to next week. Cool.
Cool. Yep. All right.
All right. Well, I think that's probably good for this week, and we can see where everyone's at when they get back.
Sounds good. Cool.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.